Hello, and welcome to this special episode of Five Alarm Task Force. If you saw the promo on social media, today we're telling the story of one firefighter who was involved in an accident caused by another firefighter unintentionally that eventually took him out of the active fire service and later on caused permanent disability. My guest today is me. This is my story. This is what happened to me. At the age of 25, 1977, I moved to North Carolina, just outside the city of Greensboro, for a job. And it just so happened that you may have heard this on previous episodes. The second day we had moved into our apartment, which was just over the city line in the county, went to the grocery store to pick up some food and other groceries and saw a firehouse. Doors were open, big red shiny apparatus in the bays. So I stopped in, as I had done probably a couple hundred times in the greater Boston area, visiting firehouses all around greater Boston. Never had plans to be a firefighter. As many of you who are regular listeners or viewers know, I had planned to become a rabbi. But life takes us down different paths. And this was the path I was now put on. And I went into the firehouse, started looking around, and I met the captain. He was walking around and saw me and introduced himself very politely and gave me a nice tour of the facilities and the apparatus, told me what each one was being used for, and asked me if I had any experience. And I said, no, not really, just with the Red Cross. I had every Red Cross badge I could have earned right up through age 18. And he said, well, just stay for a minute. And I said, sure. And he went away and came back a couple of minutes later and said, hi, the chief is here. He'd like to meet you. And I said, well, I don't need to meet the chief. It's very nice, it's an honor, but I got to get back to my office and work. I just happened to stop by here. I had to get some groceries. And he said, no, come on, meet the chief. And I did. Nice guy, Chief Bobby T. Wilson, a really nice guy. And it was an interesting meeting. And as I was walking out, he handed me an envelope and said, Mr. Greene, I hope you'll think about this, joining us. And I said, well, I can't join. You're a paid department. I work. He goes, no. We only have a couple of paid people. We're depend on our volunteers here. So I hope you'll give it a consideration. And I said I would. And then at that time I had a full beard. And he said, well, if you want to join this department, you're going to have to take a step or two closer to that razor blade of yours for it to work. And I said, well, why? What difference does it make? And he had the captain take me outside and take me out to the bay, and he opened up a SCBA case, an old Scott pack, and those were still in suitcases in those days. They weren't mounted yet. And he showed me, put a mask on my face, and he said, just try to take a deep breath in. And I did. And he says, you feel all of that air coming in from the sides? And I said, yeah. He goes, we can't have that when you're a firefighter wearing this air pack. That's why you have to be clean shaven. And so I spoke to my wife and I joined. And we were welcomed very nicely. My wife and I, a young man I met you've heard me refer to him. He was 18 years old and was in Greensboro by himself. And he found his way to the firehouse. We were both voted in the same night. We met each other that night, October of 1977. So here we are nearly over 40 years later, and he's still my best friend today. So we did a lot of training. We were both interested, very interested. And even though I worked about 60 hours a week, I spent a lot of my free time, especially if my wife was working when I was finished, at the firehouse, learning as much as I could. I try to get to as many drills as possible on Tuesday evenings, but sometimes I had activities and meetings and classes. So I would make sure that the following weekend I would see who one of the three caretakers that would be on duty on a Saturday or Sunday, and I'd spend some time there trying to catch up on what I missed. I was very lucky that we had great mentors and we were well accepted. And once we started our qualifications and learned everything on the first engine company, we were assigned to that as the first piece we could go out on. Then our rescue as well. It wasn't really a rescue that we think of today. It was a small little Ford panel truck, but it served the purpose because we usually co-responded with county EMS. And we went on numerous calls together because Rich and I spent a lot of time there, and my apartment was only about a half mile, so I was often one of the first responders, volunteer responders on scene at the firehouse, and we would ride together and run a lot of calls together. And we really enjoyed what we were doing, very much so. So that over that time period, I was honored and chosen to be on the nozzle on multiple structure fires in my first 8 months in the fire service with this department. And they didn't coddle you or, they weren't wearing kid gloves all the time. It was a good training and good experience. And we did practice burns and a lot of practice with our responses and how we come in. We had what we called a box system for our department. We had 2 stations at the time, Station 17 where I was assigned, and then Station 19 in our Northern District at the time. That whole area now, and for probably nearly 20 years, has been totally absorbed by the city of Greensboro. So that part of Guilford County is no longer county area. It's all part of the city, right by the airport and the huge tank farm right across the street from the airport. Nothing better that we like to see when we're coming in for a landing than hundreds of huge tanks holding finished product, gasoline, ready to be distributed into the area. And because of that experience, I felt a little bit more secure being on the nozzle, but I never insisted. Whoever was riding with me, whether it was my buddy Rich or somebody else, it all depended what seat you were on, the left seat or the right seat, and what the officer was going to call and which side the engine was going to pull to for the hydrant. If we had a real hydrant, or sometimes we had to draw from our dry hydrants. And our chief was, again, very big on dry hydrants. We had a lot of creeks and streams in our area, and so we put in a good number of dry hydrants using PVC pipe and manpower. We didn't have any of the little mini excavators in those days, so the hands were mini excavators. With spring coming in '78, Rich and I and one of the caretakers who had become our mentor, thankfully, a great guy named Roger, were called into the chief's office, and we were a little bit concerned. Did we do something wrong? Did we screw up on a call? Heaven forbid. And we asked the chief, and he said, gentlemen, the state of North Carolina holds a state fire college every June in various parts of the state. And I would like the 3 of you to attend. He goes, Richard, you and Steve are going to take the state course in basic firemanship skills, even though we had already qualified from our department with our in-house training. And then he told Roger he was going to go to an officer school. But we would all be at the same location in Eastern North Carolina for the course. And so we thought we'd have a good time. It was all covered and paid for, including the per diems. And we went to the little motel where our reservations had been made for us and spent the day there relaxing, having a few beers, as firefighters may want to do from time to time when they're off duty. And the next morning we headed to the campus where the classes were being held. And there were probably about 200 people who came for the State Fire College from all across the state. And in our class, met a young man who was a few years younger than I was at the time. And he was from a community where they had what was called public safety officers. That's where an officer would be a sworn police officer, as well as a firefighter, would carry their gear in their patrol car and respond to fires as dispatched. And as we learned in our communications with each other in this class and during the break for lunch, this gentleman did not like the fire side of his job. He loved the police side of his job, but he really disliked the fire. Basically, he was afraid of the fire side of the job. Now we know that's very common. Public safety, still a lot of places have them, but it's not necessarily the most popular method of first responding depending on the community. They tried it in several communities down here in South Florida. In one, it worked for a while. Then they switched back to individual departments, and it was their community was better for it, for making that effort to switch back to standard departments. So we went through our first 2 days of classwork in the classroom, and it was all lecture, and everything was fine, questions and some quizzes and stuff on the blackboard, what you'd expect. There wasn't PowerPoint at that time. We didn't even have desktop computers other than massive, huge computers from a company like IBM in colleges and businesses. But this was just a community area where the practice and classes were being held. So the first 2 days were in the classroom. It seemed okay. We had a good time. We joked around. People made mistakes. We made fun of them for that, and that was what was important. Then the next morning was the first of 2 days of live burns, quiet burns. There were a couple of very dilapidated houses that the city in which the classes were taking place were being held that had been acquired for live fire training. And as we got out there and started breaking down to groups, our officer said to me, "Greene, you've had the most time on the nozzle, even though it's only been less than a year, but you're going to be the last team to go in, because I want to get these other rookies really a chance to get in there and see what the fire's like and knock it down." I said, "Okay, Cap, not a problem. Whatever you want, whatever I can do to help. You want me to stretch hose or whatever?" It goes, "No, just watch what they're doing, because we have our regular guys here who are helping with hose." Said, okay. And so that first day I watched the first two teams go through the revolution, and they did okay. They did fairly well. And then that was the end of the day. Didn't want to, it was really hot since it was June in Eastern North Carolina. So we broke probably about through 3 o'clock and went home, went back to the hotel, showered, waited for Roger, got back for dinner, and went out for dinner and enjoyed ourselves. And the next morning we were back. And the third team, because we were going to be the fourth team, third team went in, they did their live fire training. Took them about half hour, 40 minutes, while my partner and I, my partner being the public safety officer, and I waited outside and watched, and then helped a little bit with the hose. And that was it. They finished. We took the break, about 20-minute break. And then my partner was going to go into the nozzle first, and I was going to be behind him. I was his backup. And so the officer lit off the room and brought us in. And he told me he was opening the bail, my partner, and I pushed into him, felt the pressure, pushed into him, tried to take that pressure off. And he had a little trouble manipulating the nozzle and the hose, and I tried to help him. And eventually, between me and the captain, we got the fire out. And that was that. And we closed the bail, and he dropped the hose and ran out the door. Okay. He didn't like it. We knew that from the get-go. So we took a little break, had some water, quick snack, and then it was my turn. I was going to be on the nozzle. And this was going to be the final burn. This was the last day of class, and then that was Thursday, and then Friday was our graduation and heading back home to Greensboro. So the captain came to me and says, "I really want to do a good job on this one. So I'm going to let it burn for a couple of minutes and then bring you guys in." I said, "Okay." I turned to my partner and I said, "Okay, listen, you know how I did it for you? I pushed into you and took that pressure off. I need you to do that to me. I need you to lean in and make sure you take that pressure off." Okay, I'll do it. Okay, you all set? Okay. So the captain arced off the room, and this time he let it cook really well. Now this was going to be the fourth burn in this room. And when I made entry with my partner, when I was the backup, we just had one corner that was burning. And so that's what we concentrated on. I didn't see anything else really, because that's what we focused on. Now, in this time, he had the whole CD side. Both C and D were cooking really well. There was a pass-through in the kitchen, right, basically at the CD corner. And he said, that's what I want you to shoot for first, go through the pass-through. I said, okay, I got a cap. He says, you ready? Go. Okay. So I get in position and I'm just opening the bail, just beginning to open the bail when a set of bells goes off. Now, if you're much younger than I am, most of you watching and listening to this are, in those days, we only had we didn't have the pass unit or anything like that. You just had the regulator where your hose came in, the old elephant hose that came from the mask into the regulator, and that's where the bells were. And again, the bells, as probably your pass, your pass works differently, but the warning bells for air told us that not that we were out of air, but we had maybe 5 to 7 minutes if we could control our breathing of air to get out of that bad location. And so I quickly took my right hand. I was holding the hose in my left, reached for my belt, and my bells weren't ringing. The captain reached for his weren't working. And suddenly I could hear through my mask and from the mask behind me, my partner yelling, I'm out of air, I'm out of air, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die. And before I could do anything, and I'm still opening the bail, because the fire's roaring now, it's really cooking. He drops the hose, rips his mask off in the building and yells, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I gotta get out of here, I don't wanna die, I'm gonna die, and bailed out the front door. At this point, I didn't even see him. I just could see what I could see out of the corner of my eye. Now I have a bail completely open, running, a bucket and a quarter from the nozzle, and the captain is on my left. And this hose is, I'm not in position to really hold it well, but I also knew that if I let go, there was every chance it was going to hit the captain and kill him. So I kind of like crouched down and started tucking it in my arm, into my left side, and was trying to spray around to get that water through the pass-through where the main seat of the fire was. And of course, we didn't have ticks in those days either. This is 1978. And as I was sliding back, what I didn't know was that had cooked off the room I was sliding into, which was, I guess, a living room den, earlier in one of the other 3 fires, and a hole had been burnt through the floor. And I'm kind of sliding my feet backwards, not even lifting them, just sliding them, as so keeping the hose close and trying to get that bail closed. And just as I close it, my left leg drops into that hole up to my crotch. Yeah, ouch. My right leg turned backwards. And as my left leg fell through the hole, I blew out the MCL and the ACL and the meniscus of my left knee. The pain was excruciating. But what I didn't realize that happened at the same time, and my doctors and I didn't discover this till a number of years later, the Scott packs that we wore at the time were steel. We didn't have the lightweight aluminum that are so common today. And the frame was made out of steel. And so since my torso couldn't fit through the hole, when my leg fell all the way through and I stopped because the tank and the rest of my body couldn't go through, the tank and the frame jammed into my back at about L4, L5. I didn't feel any pain from it because the pain from my knee was just, as I said, excruciating. With the bail finally closed, I dropped the hose on the side and I was yelling through my mask, I'm hurt, I'm hurt. The captain couldn't hear me well. He's going, no, you're tired, relax, relax, take a breath. I said, no, sir, I'm hurt, I'm hurt. He says, no, you're okay, you're just lying on the floor, just take a breath. I said, this is not going to work. And I pushed the hose off to the side. And using my arms, I pushed myself out of the hole using the floor. Tried standing up, but that didn't work at that point. So I dragged myself on the right side to the nearest wall, which was on the A side. But if I was looking from the inside of the house, it was to the right of the front door. If you were looking from outside the house, that wall would be to the left of to your left side. I crawled over there, and there was a piece of wood or a pipe. I don't remember now exactly. And I used that to help pull myself up on my right leg, because my left leg felt like there was a hot iron had been seared through it. And I hopped my way over to the front door and tried to hop down, and of course fell ass over teacups down the 3 steps from the front door. I was immediately surrounded by rescue and EMS because we didn't have official RIT teams or anything like that back then, but they always had standby crews for all of these live burns and 2 EMS units there. And they came over, and I told them it was my left knee. They cut my bunker pants open. I was wearing regular shorts underneath, and my knee was about twice the size of a softball. And so they bandaged me up, put a splint on me, and took me off to the hospital. The captain, I got word out to the captain, who was my officer for the exercise, to please look for these 2 other firefighters. They're my colleagues from the same fire department. Please let them know which hospital I'm going to. And so I was rushed to the nearby hospital. Luckily, they were able to take me right in. But as I learned at that point, X-rays are not very good for a knee injury, because only 3 main pieces of bone: the bottom of the femur, top of the tib, and of course the kneecap. Everything else is cartilage and tendon and tissue. So the doctor who was on call came in, and she said, look, there's not a lot we can do for you here. You're going to have to see an orthopedist at home. We're going to immobilize your knee, put you on crutches. You're going to need bed rest when you get home until you can see an orthopedist. And I said, okay. I didn't have any choice. So I waited around. My friends came. They picked me up. I told them what happened. They were very angry. They were very angry. Not with me, but they were very angry that this kind of incident happened. It should not have happened. So go back to the hotel. I called my wife from the payphone and said, honey, ask around at the synagogue for an orthopedist for me. Because I got hurt, and told her what happened, and told her I have to see an orthopedist. So she took care of that. And I took a couple of pain pills that the hospital had given me and hit the sack. The next morning was graduation. And as we were driving over there, my buddy said, he damn well better show up and apologize, because this was his fault. And I said, you're right, but I don't think it's going to happen. I just don't believe it's going to happen. And he said, why not? I said, he's just not a firefighter. And he was scared and bailed. He had no idea what was going to happen. I don't even know if he saw me come out. I don't even know where he was. I didn't see him before they put me on the stretcher, and I couldn't see around that much anymore. But I didn't see him outside with the rest of the class. So he says, well, he damn well better. I'll make him come. I said, I don't want you to do that. I don't want anything like that to happen. Just leave it alone. What happens, happens. I said, I'm not going to graduate, but hey, you know what? It was a great school. I was glad I was here. We got to spend time, the 3 of us together, and get to know each other even more. I said, yeah, it's a price to pay, but listen, it could have happened back in the department going on one of those house fires. So that's that. So they start calling the to give the certificates for the graduation for the courses, various courses, and they came to our course. And they started calling people up. And as we were actually walking down the aisle to go to our seats, one of my buddies spotted the kid who had caused this to happen. And I said, don't go over to him. Just, he saw us, so he knows we're here, and that's the end of it. Just leave it. And as they got down to the letter F in the last name, I was just thinking, well, there won't be a Greene on this call, that's for sure. Be next class, if there is a next class. And yet, to the three of our surprise, I was called up to get the certificate for completion. So I asked my buddy to go up, and he said, no, you have to go. It's your certificate. You got to go pick it up. So I got out of the chair and hobbled down to the stage. We're about 15, 20 rows back. And when I got up to the stage, the gentleman handing out the certificates mentioned the accident, and that I was on, everybody could see I was on crutches. My knee was all bundled up. And he said, we're proud to award this certificate to Mr. Greene for his excellent work in the firefighting class, especially yesterday. And that was it. And we were done. And there was a break from the ceremony. I think there were some refreshments out in the hallway. And they saw him again, and I said, just leave it. Don't do anything. Let's just let it go. And we headed back to North Carolina, to Greensboro. Got home. My wife gave me the name of the orthopedist, made an appointment. And I don't remember if we had an MRI at that point yet. I don't think so. So, I think they had the old CAT scan. That's what we had to do, which was pretty unpleasant, to tell you the truth. That was somewhat inconclusive. So they had to do what was called an arthrogram. And that's where they would fill the knee, inject the knee with saline, and blow it up, and do another type of CAT scan or X-ray to look at it that way. It was after that test that he told me that I was going to need surgery. Now, I had heard about arthroscopic breakthroughs in knee surgery, but I didn't know a lot at that time. I had already started my EMT class. Matter of fact, 2 months after getting into the fire service, I joined the next EMT class available. And so we scheduled it for December. This was now beginning of July already, because I needed to work at the synagogue. And we had a break. So I figured that would be the best time for me to get looked at and get it taken care of. And so we scheduled it for December of '78. And what I learned was that in those days, they could only do the scope for arthroscopy. They couldn't do the surgical procedure through it yet. So they then did what was called an arthrotomy. They opened the knee and did the repair of what they could repair through the incision, and had 2 holes from the arthroscope being put into 2 different locations. And that was December, and I think I was able to get back into the fire service by April or May, back into our department, active service. Well, I shouldn't say active service. I was put on limited service. I could drive the rescue. There were certain things they would allow me to do on scene, but I wasn't allowed to do firefighting for another 6 weeks or so, even though I had the doctor's permission to return. I was lucky at that point that until then, and until I left North Carolina in the early summer of 1981, I was able to not only go back and be a volunteer firefighter, I was also invited to become a part-time EMT with Guilford County EMS. Our station was located near what was called Base 3. The county was divided up into 4 main areas for coverage. Base 1 was the downtown area. Base 2 was the city of High Point. Base 3 was our area, and then there was Base 4. And we, as I mentioned earlier, we would co-run with EMS on a lot of rescue calls, cardiac calls, MVCs, et cetera. And I was invited to go and meet the ops director, and I went there and met him. He was leaving to go to the actual first PA class in the country in Washington, D.C. But he said that the paramedics and EMTs who had been on the Base 3 ambulances, or 2 ambulances at Base 3, enjoyed working with me. I'd finished my EMT and on calls when we ran together. And when there was an opening for just a fill-in, EMT medic, they put my name in there, and the ops director liked what he heard, and he invited me in, and he told me that. And he said, look, if you can't take a shift, don't take it. That's all. It's just a fill-in. But we're going to be giving you some extra training in-house. So we're going to get you to what's called EMT2, or later became full paramedic. It was North Carolina was kind of like a step between EMT and full paramedic. But, and it was fine. I mean, I was just thrilled with the idea. I was honored to have been recommended, and I took it. I, again, spoke with my wife first, and I made sure that I didn't take any shifts where it would interfere with my work, because although the synagogue knew I was leaving, I still wanted to leave with my head held high and doing a great job. I turned around the school quite a bit and enlarged our enrollment, changed the curriculum to a stronger curriculum for the kids, had great teachers, and the school was really doing well. And they had planning to offer me a renewal, but we want to relocate. My wife especially wanted to relocate further north where our families were and relatives. And so before I left town, I was invited again back to EMS headquarters and invited to stay in North Carolina and become a full-time employee of county EMS. They offered me a full education package to raise me all the way up to paramedic. They offered me all the other perks until I asked what the salary was. And now remember, this is 1981 in North Carolina, and the salary was 14 for the year plus your benefits, health insurance, and et cetera. And I was already making at that time almost twice that at the synagogue. And had I stayed there, I would have gone up even higher there, my salary, with another $4 or $5 grand. But my wife really wanted to get back up north. And so we left. We moved outside of Syracuse, Onondaga County. Great city, Syracuse. And the small towns around it are wonderful, beautiful. It's a beautiful area. Yeah, is it cold? Yeah. And those of you watching from the northern climes, you know. I grew up in Boston, so I was used to cold, snow, and blizzards. I wasn't quite as used to it as I experienced in Syracuse, with some wind chills 34 below in the middle of a night when we get blown out for a call, things like that. Yes, I did join. It happened to be, again, on the way to a supermarket. My wife and I came down the main street, and I see a little brick sign that says, "Do It, Volunteer Fire Department." And I had a big smile on my face, and she says, "Knock that grin right off your face." So I did. And well, you know what? We're going to take a break here, folks. And when we come back, I'm going to tell you what happened in upstate New York, and then subsequently down here in South Florida and what happened to me because of it. So if you're watching the video, you won't see anything much change. But if you're listening to the audio, we'll be right back right after these words. As always, please stay tuned. Hi, welcome back. So we moved to Syracuse, New York, the area of Syracuse, and I joined a department there. And about 2 years in, 2.5 years in, went and bought a new car at the local Chevy dealership. It was the first Chevy Blazer. It was actually the second year. I would never get a car in its first year out, but the second year of the Chevy Blazer was a little new design from the first year. And living in Syracuse, I knew with the four-wheel drive, it was going to come in handy. My wife couldn't quite understand why we needed a four-wheel drive, but she found out one evening when we went to the movies, and it'd been cold weather, but it was okay when we got to the movies. By the time we came out, there were 3 inches of snow, wet, slippery snow on the ground. And just getting out of the parking lot of the theater was somewhat difficult for most other cars. Once I started to slide, I slipped it into four-wheel low, and we just, slow speed cruised past, and my wife's head is going back and forth, and she sees every car that we pass. So on the way home, she said, okay, now I know why you got the four-wheeler. So she understood that, and she was okay with that. We were at a call. We had gone to a call, a motor vehicle accident, I believe it was, and it was icy, and I slipped on the ice and hurt the same knee again. Knew an orthopedist from the synagogue I had been working at, and called him from the ER and said he would be in to see me. And I said, well, I don't think they're going to admit me. He says, I don't care. I'm coming in. Just stay where you are. So he was nice enough to come in. He'd become a good friend and came in and said, okay, I'm going to set you up for the MRI tomorrow, and then we'll go from there. And he said, let's see what's going to go on. I said, okay. And so we did. We had the MRI the next morning. Interesting experience for the first time. And came in and said, you need surgery again. It's pretty messed up in there. I said, okay, when do you want to do it? He says, I can do it tomorrow morning. I said, okay, what time do you want me here? He says, come in 6:30 and we'll get everything done. You'll be here a couple of nights and I'll get you home. I said, okay. So we went through the surgery, went through the physical therapy rehab, and just could not get away from discomfort in that knee. And I would have to wear a brace very often. I had been taking a back seat at the firehouse once I was able to get out, up and around and drive, even though I had to wear the brace. And what I had done for them was I set up a video unit that was kept in our heavy rescue. It consisted of JVC had just come out with the mini camcorder system with the charger, the player, the camera, etc., all fitting into a unit that would sit on this back shelf of our rescue. And then I was in charge at that point of shooting video, whether it was training or an actual call. That was my responsibility. Take out the system, start rolling tape that we would use for after action review. And so I did that for a couple of months and kept going to see the doctor on a regular basis, doing my PT. And finally, the doctor said, I don't think you can do firefighting anymore. said, what do you mean? I said, you fixed the knee. He says, I fixed what I could, but this is the second surgery on that knee. He says, I just can't guarantee you how strong it's going to be. And, you can check with your fire surgeon, which we had at this department, but he said, I would not advise it. So a couple of days later, I sat with the fire surgeon and gave him the paperwork that my doctor had given me. And he said, I have to agree. I can't put you out there on the fire ground, at least to fight fire. I said, what about as an engineer? Now, one of the downsides I have with this department was that when I got there, came up from North Carolina, I had gone through 3 years of the fire college, certified fireman, basic firemanship skills. Second year, we did hydraulics and engineering. So I was a qualified driver and engineer. Our apparatus in our station carried 750 gallons of water, as well as 10 5-gallon pails of AFFF. Our tanker held 2,500 gallons of water. But in this department, the only thing I was allowed to learn to drive was our Chevy Suburban. Yeah. So I didn't know what to do. It felt like a core of me had been ripped out of me. By this point, nearly 8 years in, I defined myself as a firefighter. It was part of the person I was. I was a man of faith, a husband. I was a father at this time, and a firefighter, and a teacher. I've been teaching since I was 13 years old. That's a story for a different time. But now I was almost 30, and I've been teaching the entire time and doing administration as a COO, Chief Operating Officer for a nonprofit, for a synagogue. What was I going to do if I couldn't fight fire? Because this wasn't the kind of department that my Greensboro department was, where there was always something someone could do. I remember I was responding to one of those, it was the second fire. I was going to be on the nozzle. I turned out to be on the nozzle. I didn't know I was going to be on the nozzle. And I spoke to the young man next to me who joined the same night that my pal Rich and I did, was voted in. And the captain turned around in the seat and said, Steve, why don't you take the nozzle? He said to the other guy, Bill, I want you to, take out the spaghetti, straighten it out, and get back up Steve. We both said, okay. Pulled in, got out, took my loops, took the nozzle over my shoulder, took off. Somebody was straightening. I assumed that Bill was straightening out the hose and everything behind me. Captain brought me up to the rear door on the seaside. It was a laundry pantry area fire. Cooking really well, but he said, okay, let's go and attack it, and opened the nozzle. Did it follow the captain's orders? We did a good sweep, got a good knockdown, brought it down a little bit to open up the nozzle a little bit and cool stuff down. And finally gave me the double tap on the shoulder, shut the bail. Let's look at it and let the chief look at it. And shut the bail, turned around to thank my partner, and it wasn't Bill. And I said to the captain, hey, is Bill okay? He goes, yeah, he's okay. He's go talk to the chief about it. Talk to the chief. Okay. So I went over after let me take a break for a second. And I went over to the chief. I said, is Bill okay? He says, oh yes, Steve, Bill's fine. Bill's fine. I said, but he was in the other seat. He was supposed to back me up. He goes, well, he had a little problem. He has a little problem of going into fire. He's not right there yet. I said, oh no, that doesn't mean he's going to be thrown out of the department. He goes, oh no. He's going to help us with ground ladders. He'll do stuff on the fire ground, whatever he can do. He's just not going to make an entry. And I thought that was amazing. Unfortunately, the fire department outside Syracuse didn't have that. They had fire police, so I was allowed to join fire police and took their course and responded with fire police. And then, to a very big surprise, the chief called me in and said, you got a lot of knowledge, you got good experience behind you. He goes, the village needs a fire inspector. And I know you want to stay connected. And he says, I know you might not have been well welcomed here or appreciated, except for when you helped with the fundraising effort. He says, but I can see the firefighter that you are. Would you like to be a fire inspector? And he showed me the gold badge, gold and blue badge. And I said, well, what do I have to do? He says, well, you got to take a few classes. But it's just going to be you and the instructor. And then we need, you'll be on call, and as you go around, when you have the time, then you check stores, like especially at the mall, make sure that their exit doors are clear, and check out the gas stations, make sure everything is good there, and things like that. I said, okay, I'll do that. Because I said, do I have to give up fire police? He goes, no, absolutely not. But if you get a call when you're on a fire police call that the inspector's needed, then you're going to have to break away and respond to the call. I said, yes, sir, I'll do it. So I went, it was about, I think it was 6 hours, 8 hours, maybe. I don't remember. Many years ago. But I did it. And I remember my first call was on a Friday night, the night that Ghostbusters debuted in theaters. And there was a call that there was overcrowding at the movie theater. And this was the second show. So it was like 8-something already. Now, I'd already worked at my store. I had a video store back in those days, long before there was ever a Blockbuster. And I was exhausted, but I was the one on call that weekend, so I had to go. And the parking lot was jam-packed. Luckily, I got the parking in the fire zone. And went inside to look for the manager. I asked the young lady in the ticket booth to get the manager. She said she was going to try. She wasn't sure where he was. And I found the theater where Ghostbusters was playing, and I looked in, opened the door, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There were people sitting squashed together in the aisles, multiple people in seats, all the way down to the separation on the floor between the main floor and the stage floor where the screen came down to, people sitting up on the stage in front of the screen. So I knew this was going to be a baptism of fire for this little Jewish guy. So went back up, found the manager, and said, you're going to have to shut the movie down right now. He goes, well, I can't. It's all this money has been paid. I said, you're going to have to shut it down, or I'm going to write a ticket right now. I said, you have about a half a dozen violations, which is going to cost you several grand if I write these tickets. And once the ticket is pulled out of the book, I can't do anything about it. It's not in my control. And that was one of the classes when I met with the judge, who I happen to know. But he said, when you write a ticket, whether it's a parking ticket for parking in a fire zone or you write a violation ticket, once that white copy is in your hand and it's out of the book, that ticket comes to me, the copy when you turn on your book. So he says, well, what do you want me? I said, first of all, you're going to shut down the film. And now I want to see how many tickets you normally sell for the theater to fill the theater in seats. And then I want to know the difference between how much money you took in tickets between what those seats would have run and the total money you took in. And that'll be the difference. So, well, I don't know. Okay, he said, not a problem. I pulled out the book, started writing. He says, okay, I'll do it. And eventually we emptied the theater, and you had to have a ticket stub with a certain number on it through a number field. If you didn't have that, then you got your money back. You'd have to come back and go to another showing. And that was my start as a fire inspector. But it was helpful and possibly could have saved lives there. And I did make tours of the stores in the malls, the two malls, and check the gas stations. And oftentimes there was one right across the street from my store. I mean, I could see it every day when I was in my store. and people were smoking at the pumps. And the gas station owner, and I used to fill up there on a regular basis because it was right across the street. So whether I was going home or I was going to go get a cup of tea and a donut at the place next door, I would go by that gas station. And finally, I just had enough one morning, and one of my other people came in to take care of the store. I walked over there, and I knew the guy, and I said, "Look, I hate telling you this, but I'm going to have to cite you. You're letting people smoke at the pumps. The signs are right there." He says, "Well, it's not up to me to tell them." I said, "It is up to you. You're the owner. You got to tell them that they have to stop. They cannot smoke a cigarette at the pump or cigar at the pump or a pipe. You can't have any lit. You know that. You know better than that. I don't want to cite you. I don't want to hurt you, but you got to do this. You got to." "Well, I can't do it. I can't tell them that." I said, "Listen, here's what I'll do. I'll give you an hour tomorrow. I'll stand here and I'll do it. But you're going to take over after that, or we'll cite you." How bad is the ticket?" I said, "You don't even want to know. You don't want to know." Okay. So I did, went back. Probably in that hour, there were probably a dozen people that I had to show my badge to and tell them they couldn't smoke at the pump, or they would be written up. And also would remind them that it was also a federal offense, not just a local law. So we did that, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for that time. It gave me something to do. And then finally, we decided that we were able to sell the store, make a decent profit, make the money we invested back. And I went back into synagogue work, and we moved to South Florida. So not being able to be a volunteer, and at where we first lived in Florida, in the city of Hollywood, there wasn't volunteer. I was too far west. If we had been closer to the east side of town, there were a couple of small towns that still had volunteer departments, but I really didn't know what I was going to be able to do because of my knee. So I just did my work. That was 85 to 86. Then we moved a little north of there. I was hired by another synagogue for 2 years. Then we went to Jersey for 2 years. Now, where we lived in Jersey, where we lived, there was a volunteer fire department, and where I worked, there was a volunteer fire department. But by then, I had already had 2 additional surgeries on my left knee. Then in 1992, at the age of 40, I had been working for 2 years at a promotional travel company and travel agency as the operations director. I made sure things were going smoothly. Packaging was coming in, our flyers were being printed, designing flyers for our promotional work and things like that. Once in a while, I'd carry a computer or somebody help move a desk, and I was okay. And I woke up one morning with a backache. Well, 80% of Americans suffer a backache almost every year. Of that 80% of those pains are caused simply by basic, simple muscle strains or strains. Sprains or strains, right? And a couple of days of bed rest, not long-term bed rest, a couple of days of bed rest and some exercises and warm heat packs or salves that we have today, of course, would alleviate that. But the other 20%, that's where I did not know it, but I was going to be in the other 20%, which is not muscle sprains or strains, but it is skeletal in nature. So I went to my chiropractor on that Tuesday. I've been with him for a couple of years. He did a great job for me, for my wife, for one of my daughters. Just a nice guy. And when Tuesday, wasn't feeling any better. Wednesday, it was feeling worse. Then Thursday, I went to him and he said, "Steve, this is more than chiropractic. I need you to get into full medical care." He goes, "What's the number of your primary care doctor?" I'm going to call him and talk to him. I gave him my primary's number. He called them. I could hear him talking on the phone. They had to be 20 minutes on the phone together. And he says, that's great. Thank you very much for all your help. I really appreciate it. And he came back to the room and says, okay, your doctor's going to be stopping by your home because his office was right around the corner from my house. He's going to stop by your home after hours and give you some medication. And he's going to schedule you for an MRI. By the time my doctor came, a wonderful guy, may he rest in peace, just a terrific doctor and friend. He brought by and said, you're scheduled Monday morning and I'm going to be there with you. Can you get a ride? And I said, Ruthie's working. What am I going to do? Oh, and he says, call so-and-so, who's a mutual friend of ours, also turned out to be our attorney. And he picked me up and took me down to the hospital on the east side of Fort Lauderdale, had the MRI. And you know how you usually have to wait for the report. Okay, well, you know what? I didn't have to wait for the report. I came out of the room and was told I had a severe herniation at L4, L5. And I said, how did this happen? Well, you must have lifted something heavy. I said, I didn't hit anything heavy. Lift anything
The movie
heavy.
Dare Samurai has an IMDb.
So I said, I don't understand, why. He says, I don't have the answer for that, but you're going to need to see a neurosurgeon. Okay, so I thought my knee was bad. Now I have a bad back. So my attorney, luckily for me, earlier that summer, had back surgery that he needed with a doctor up in the Palm Beach area, West Palm Beach area, who was one of the chief trauma surgeons for Palm Beach County. And he said, I'm going to get you an appointment with him and I'll drive you up there. He's very hard to get into, but for me, he'll see you. And it took about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. So we were into third week of October, well, almost around this time. This is being recorded. And we went up there, saw me. He says, I'm going to send you for another MRI because it has a different focus and ratio that I need to look at your knee before I can decide what we're going to do. So the hospital was up there. So I made an appointment, drove up. It wasn't comfortable, but I did what I had to do and drove up, had the MRI, came home. And the next day he called me. He says, you got to come back in. We're going to do surgery. We have to schedule surgery for you. I said, okay. So I went back to his office and he said, I can do it in December. He said, this is what it's going to do. This is what it's going to take. This is where we're going to do it. And we'll go from there. I said, okay. So waited the time out. He had me do some preoperative exercise therapy. Went in, had it done. It was really painful, very painful afterwards. And was in the hospital for, I think it was one night. And my wife brought me home. I slept on the pullout so I wouldn't bother her. It was difficult to sleep because of the pain, etc. And went for my first follow-up with the surgeon, and he said it was a little bit more intense than I expected, even from the MRI. I had to do more work in there, and I did what I could to reduce the pressure on the disc. But I don't know that with arthritics and surgical scarring, if it's going to be the end all and be all. He says, but I can tell you that you're not going to be able to go back to work to what you were doing. I said, why not? He said, because it's going to take a while for this to heal. And I can't have you moving things or lifting things, more than a couple of pounds. I don't even want you lifting up your girls in your arms right now. You can't do that. He says, I'm going to give you a letter noting that you are medically disabled as of this date, in my estimation as your physician. So I had to let my former boss know about it, and he sent me a Dear John letter with a final check. But I realized and remembered that when I was 23 years old, 24, working at the synagogue in Syracuse, I let somebody sell me a private disability policy. And I thought initially, well, disability isn't for me. I'm able-bodied. I don't have anything else going on with me at that point in time. What do I need disability for? I found out in 1992, because while I had been making a very, very good salary in the travel business, now I couldn't work. And other than just a little bit of teaching at a local synagogue, this was not going to pay the bills, even though my wife was also working and working very hard, basically 7 days a week. This disability policy, I activated it, kicked in after 30-day waiting period. And it's still paying me today in 2021. Not the same amount I was getting back then, because I reached the retirement age. So there was a reduction, but it still pays a nice sum because of that. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, I'm going to tell you about what has happened with this injury and what we found out. So again, if you're watching the video, you're not going to see anything change. If you're watching the audio, you know what's going to happen. We'll have a few interesting words for you, and then we'll be right back. As always, please stay tuned. Welcome back to this episode of 5-Alarm Task Force. I'm your host and the guest, Steve Greene, for today's webcast and podcast. So here I am at 42. I've already lost the ability of part of my identity of being a firefighter. Back in '85. 7 years later, I lose the ability to work full-time at a job. I couldn't sit at a desk job for that amount of time, full work day, because of the back injury. Couldn't carry things. Who was I? We didn't have a behavioral health initiative in those days. Those were still the days of the sage words of suck it up when a firefighter had a problem. But I can tell you, and those of you who have been disabled on the job or disabled even though you were a firefighter and something else happened that caused you to become disabled, it is like having your heart and your core ripped out of you. It makes no difference if you're a career firefighter, a volunteer firefighter, part pay, or WUI. This is a passion for us. We are a special breed. We are willing to risk our lives for strangers and their possessions, for a community where we may not know but a handful of people and their buildings and their possessions. Why? It's that little magic flame that burns in our heart. We want to help others. I knew that was a part of me, as I said, working with the Red Cross, getting all the first aid certifications, water safety instructor, going all the way up to that, senior lifeguard, all that, because I helped people. And that's what I love doing. The fire service gave that new meaning for me. I've been out since 85, yet every single day since 1985, I've carried a full BLS bag, rescue bag in my vehicle. And my family can account for probably over 200 incidents that either they were with me at some point or I told them about, where I was first or second on scene before EMS, fire, rescue, or law enforcement showed up. And I had to take care of people who were hurt or sick. Even with my bad knee, even with my back, the adrenaline kicks in. And I do what I know what to do to assist, assess, and stabilize until rescue gets there. Haven't saved everybody, but thank goodness most of the people that I assisted at least survived their time with me. People ask me today, why do you still do that? Your back is so bad. You know, I'm sitting here, folks, as I record this, wearing a device called a StimWave, which is a spinal cord stimulator. It's placed in my back, about 13 inches of surgical plastic. At the very top of it are 4 dual sets of electrodes. In the middle of it is a tiny, very tiny circuit board with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi on it. And at the bottom is an internal antenna. And I wear a belt with an external antenna. And the electrodes are placed at a nerve through the surgery that blocks the pain signal from my bad disc L4, L5 on the left side from getting to the brain. So I don't feel the pain when I wear the StimWave device. However, the body knows it's still in pain and causes a lot of fatigue because of that. But initially, I don't know that until either the little power source I wear runs out of power and I switch it off for another one, or I take it off at night because I have to wear this belt right now. And it's very cumbersome to try to use it at night. And then the pain rushes back. I've had a total of 4 surgeries on the left side, L4, L5. 1 surgery on L5S1 from a different injury. And probably over 200 shots, various types of shots from epidurals, facet blocks, etc., in my back. And it's taken a very heavy toll on my life. But I never figured out why this happened. And so when this journey with back problems started, I started talking to my doctors. They asked, well, how'd you hurt your back? Because for them, this was an old injury. My first surgery was 1992. And we talked over. I went through everything that I'd gone through. And I said I never remembered hurting my back specifically. I remember just before we left in 1981, just before we left Greensboro, I was in bed for like 3 days because my back was really so bad. But it was on the right side, not the left side. And then when we got up to Syracuse, I had a situation again where I lost a couple of days of work because my back was hurting really bad. And so slowly but slowly, with one of my neurosurgeons then and my pain management, probably the best one I've had in the last 10 years, and I've been with him now for 10 years down here in South Florida, we pieced it together that what probably happened, as I stated earlier, was that when I fell through that hole in that drill house, that fire drill house, back in the summer of 1978, and my body couldn't go through the hole anymore, the steel case and the weight of the air tank which was relatively full. I'd probably been on air less than 10 minutes when all of this occurred in that burn house. They went in when they hit the floor and they pushed in to the back, right at L4, L5. And that began the damage because it wasn't a full blow because it hit the floor and then got pushed in, but it was the beginning of the damage. And both the neurosurgeons and the pain doctors have told me that once that starts, then everything else starts happening. Once there's some damage, there's going to be some sort of scarring that starts there. There's going to be some arthritic scarring, and it's going to impinge on the nerve. And altogether, this is what happened. It's like making a stew. You throw in meat and veggies and your spices and you just mix it together, and the stew is delicious. In my case, I wound up with a sour stew. I blew out my knee, which wound up requiring 5 surgeries. That knee probably needs to be replaced. I just don't know if I'm in a physical condition to go through it. My wife had it a year ago, and she's terrific. She's done wonderfully with it. She prepped for 3 months, swimming in the pool every night, doing exercises in the pool every night before her surgery. And it was postponed a month because of the COVID in 2020, but in end of September of 2020, she had it. And even the first time that the home nurse came to visit her, she said, "Oh my God, you're doing great. This is terrific. Your mobility is amazing, how far you can bend that knee." But it all started. All of this began where it didn't have to. This podcast, as a matter of fact, is a cathartic for me. Not this very one, but doing 5 Alarm Task Force. Because in the mid 2000 teens, I was having a very tough time and in a dark place. I was basically lying in bed with my knees over pillows the entire day, one heat pack after another. I had already had a medication medication pump surgically implanted into the upper right quadrant of my abdomen in 2005. That was replaced in 2012. Then it failed in 2017, requiring me to be in the ER and then have emergency surgery for replacement. And then the stim wave came along, which, look, allows me to be up and do this podcast. But it was a dark place. I had gone on social media. I had still kept my other company, Dalmatian Productions. We were still trying to create a high quality TV show about the fire service. We came out with our drama series, limited series drama, Cause and Origin. But I was not a happy guy. I couldn't do much. I could stay in my home and do stuff, but we hardly went out to dinner. We hardly ever went to the movies. It was just too painful, physically painful. And so it took an emotional toll. And to the point where I knew I had to talk with somebody. And I did. And it was not the first time. All I remember from the first time was when we knew we wanted to move from Greensboro, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, what I could do. I didn't know if I wanted to stay as a director of education at a school, religious school. I enjoyed it. I loved teaching, but I didn't know what I was going to do, and I was lost. And one of my friends at the synagogue recommended I talk to somebody. And I said, okay, I'll do it. I asked him for the phone number, put it on my desk. And the next day, picked up the phone, started to dial, and hung up. Next day, started to dial and hung up. Took me over a week to finally make that call. and make an appointment. And it was a good couple of appointments. Nice person, good counselor. We talked things through. That was good. Then in Syracuse, when we were planning to open our store, it was delayed because of construction problems. And my late dad was really excited for my brother and I for opening these stores. We had purchased 5 franchise licenses. We opened a store up in Syracuse and one in Boston. We were really excited about this store, and my dad couldn't wait to come up and see it. We were expecting our second child. And in July of '84, my dad died. I was with him. I was visiting in Framingham, where they lived when he took sick. When I called 911, ran down in my car, got my BLS bag, ran up, started assessing my dad, taking his vitals. I knew by his BP and pulse, he was not doing well. EMS got there, and unfortunately, in Massachusetts in 1984, the paramedic law was only effective in the Boston City Hospital District. The rest of Massachusetts still had EMTs only. I didn't realize that. I was already an upper level in New York State. And when EMTs came up and I gave him the bullet of all the details with my dad, we got him downstairs into the ambulance. I said, let's start an IV and call in to control, see what we can, because he's in VTAC. We need to convert him. They didn't have a defibrillator. We didn't have AEDs in that time. Couldn't start an IV line. All we could do was keep the BP cuff on him and monitor him. We got him to the ER. He was viable to the point where they were able to do a successful conversion. Took him upstairs, got to go see him. And that time I had a lot more hair. So he knew I was supposed to go see my cousin who owned a beauty shop for a haircut. So he said, go get your haircut and I'll see you after lunch. I said, you sure, Pop? And he said, yeah, I'll see you after lunch. Got to my cousin's place, visited with them, hadn't seen them in a year or so. Got a call from my brother at the beauty shop. I had to rush back to the hospital, and my dad was gone. I, again, hit a dark place. I couldn't believe that he was gone. He was so happy for us, my brother and I, my younger brother and I, that we were going to open the store, and we were trying something. He said to us in many phone calls, you know, kids, I wanted to try something. I was made many offers to leave my company and come work for somebody else for a lot more money than I was being paid. But I was afraid what would happen if it wouldn't work out. How would I take care of you boys, the 3 of you boys and your mom? He says, you boys are trying. I'm so proud of you. I can't wait to be there. Can't wait to be there. It was tough. It was very tough. And I went into a dark place again. When my dad passed, we were in Framingham, Mass. We didn't know it, but my wife was pregnant again. We had wanted that, but we were told that there was a little chance it was going to happen without me having surgery again. We had no idea at the time. So even with the joy of having our second daughter, it was a dark cloud. I would get up early in the morning and go to the firehouse. A couple of us would usually meet there for coffee or hot chocolate or tea, whatever, first thing in the morning, and go our separate ways. And I'd go to the store, do my work, paperwork, anything to try to just get away from knowing that my dad wasn't there anymore. Got to the point where my wife said, you better see somebody. It's going to be an empty house with just one person in it. So all this occurred right after I couldn't be a firefighter anymore. That happened right after I couldn't be a firefighter. Listen, I know it's tough to reach out. I made a serious error in judgment back in the 90s, and it was a real another dark place. Again. Came out of it with good counseling, good people, my family. And put my mind back to work on Dalmatian Productions and making a good TV show about the fire service. But when, I guess all of us go through a time when we're alone, and instead of thinking the thoughts we think on a regular point, we start opening up that door to that dark place. And sometimes we only put a step in, and sometimes we walk right in that door. And I thought it was important to do this podcast, this webcast today, because I know I'm not alone. There are firefighters out there who are out on injury right now. Most of you, God willing, will go back to work, do exactly what you were doing before. Some won't. Some won't be able to. Whether it's an injury, a medical condition, whatever takes us out of active duty while we're still young enough to do the work that we love, we're passionate about it. At least most of us. It rips a part of you out. We see that. We've learned more about that with the Firefighter Cancer Initiative and the Behavioral Health Initiative. Yet, over the last 10 days, we've lost 2 firefighters to their own hand that I know of. We all go into those dark places. Every one of us. And if you say you don't, you're a liar. Every one of us, once in a while, something causes us to go into a dark place. And most of the time, we're strong enough, we clear our heads, and we're good, and we come out of it on our own, or maybe a little help from family. But sometimes we can't. We don't. So then you have a choice. Let it eat you alive and take you away from the things that you still love, even if they don't love you back, and the people that care about you. Because especially if you're a firefighter, police officer, EMS, there are people who care about you. Not just your family, but your coworkers, the ones you see every day or almost every day. Whether you shift work or 24 on, 48 off, your crews, they care about you. This accident to my knee that spiraled into my disability did not have to happen. The young man who was my partner had been trained at his department and then was now being trained at the State Fire College. He heard in the classroom, what I had heard when I was first trained on air packs, and I heard again in our classroom, that the bells don't mean you're out of air. The bells mean you're running low on air. Do your best to get out. And if your air runs out before you get in, tuck under your nozzle and put it inside your jacket. It'll be better than just nothing else at all. That was the drill. It was drilled into us. That's the way we learned it, both in my department and in the class. This young man panicked. It's a mistake. He was overcome by fear. I understand that. But the least he could have done was come over and apologize at the graduation ceremony. That wouldn't have changed my life because the damage was already done. We just didn't know how extensive at that time. Lots of us get hurt on the job. Again, no matter what division of fire service you're in, we get hurt. It's a predictable event in this line of work. Oftentimes, it just takes a couple of days and you can be back. Sometimes it's a diagnosis we don't want to hear. And by the way, as a firefighter who used gear in 77, which was full of PFAS, in an apartment from 81 to 77 to 81, that was awash in AFFF because of our chief's vast knowledge of flammable liquid fires and AFFF with the 3M company. I'm now waiting for the results of CT scans I just had last week to find out, hopefully, what this mystery malady is that's been hanging over me for almost a year now. Caused me to lose over 30 pounds. I'm not the person that you saw way back when. But this podcast, doing it thanks to the encouragement of good friends who said, Steve, these were from social media, and they said, Steve, you're a firefighter. You need to talk with other firefighters. You post well on Twitter and Instagram. You have a lot of good things to say. You need to share it and get other people to share it with you. I didn't even know what a podcast was in those days. I had done radio for 3 years with a good friend of mine who was the former PIO and a firefighter with another department. It's called Burning Issues. Some of you older guys may remember that, and gals may remember that show, Burning Issues. It was like a podcast. We did it at a radio station that went out on the internet all around the world. But I had to learn, and I started to do this podcast in September of 2016. Here we are, just over 5 years later. And I decided, after reading some of Chief Billy's close calls and some of the articles in the trades, it was time to share my story. Even a guy who has a successful podcast, great guests, has dark areas, has been in dark places. Yes, it happens. Something happens to us and we can't be firefighters anymore. It's not easy, especially if you loved it as much as I did. But you can get through it. You just have to want to get through it. Remember, you can always text the word badge to 741-741 if you need somebody to talk with. There's somebody on that other side waiting to help you. You can look at your own department to see if they have a debriefing officer, someone you can speak with there in private. Find your clergy person and ask to make an appointment to speak with them. Seek out professional assistance. Reach out on one of the helplines. If you're in a dark place and you're thinking of dark things, there are lots of helplines out there. And people want to help. We want to help. I don't know. There are only a couple of other, I don't know many podcasters by name. I know several. But I don't know. I only know one now who's been in a dark place too. and made it public. And is coming out of it and doing the best he can. And that's what I'm trying to do, the best I can. So that's this episode of Five Alarm Task Force. Unique, not to be repeated. But if you have questions, you can always send me an email to Steve G at the numeral 5-alarm taskforcecorp.org. I'll answer to the best of my ability. I'm not a psychologist, a psychiatrist. I'm just another snot-nosed, belly-crawling nozzle jockey who loved the job he did and loved helping people and still does. Until next time, folks, stay safe, stay well. Let's make sure everyone goes home. God bless.